Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. And you guys know I took a little bit of a break from doing Goldenlight Academy, but I had to figure out how I was going to save the world. And when I went to my Vipassana 10-day meditation retreat, I think this is the first episode we're filming posted. So I will do an entire episode on that. I'll probably do like 10 episodes because it deserves that. Exactly. Imagine me like trying to cross my legs for 11 hours a day and be okay. But I'm actually coming to you live from San Diego. And this is the first time I think I've done this from a hotel room. So shout out to all of the decor behind me that I would never use on my walls. But I do get to overlook the ocean today. And I'm really excited because it really does help to temper this conversation, which really is about the risk of being real, prevention, power, and the power of lived experience. And I have a dear friend and colleague and someone I respect who's going to be joining us in a couple minutes. I'm really excited. But, I'm out here in San Diego at the SDCOE conference, which is the San Diego Conference, the Center for Equity. They have a conference, and I said, "Are you sure you want me to speak? Because I'm still the bad boy of healthcare, and I don't know if I'm gonna get canceled in San Diego." But I did talk about revolutionizing education, and I spoke with school administrators, superintendents, teachers, people who are on the front lines who are trying to figure out what do we do post all of the assassination on our ability to instill equity and diversity and inclusion within our schools in California. And so I had a couple people walk out on me. Of course, that always happens whenever I speak. But the majority of the people who were there, they felt seen, they felt heard, they were grateful for the light that they were given. And I didn't just go in and say, you need to do all of this. I also affirmed them and allowed them to see that the work they do is essential to the survival of our little humans in
I was
America. So
surprised
here's a little clip,
at
and let me see if I
how
can get this to work
brilliant
this morning.
the children were when they were allowed to be smart, when they were trusted with their minds instead of me telling them, well, let's talk about Steinbeck today. Now, I'm from Salinas, so I do like Steinbeck, but even Steinbeck's not applicable all the time. When I said, let's do a Socratic seminar and let's talk about your community, let's talk about the icons that are important to you. Yeah, that's going to be Cardi B sometimes. Okay, like we're in the hood. Across the street from the school is a.
I just wanted you guys to hear that last part. And the thing is that this is what I learned as a teacher was that, children, first of all, they're way smarter than us. I mean, the generations that are coming, Generation Alpha and the generation that has Lizzie's kid, like they're way smarter than us already. They're way more humanistic, and they have a lot more emotional intelligence. They are a lot more tolerant, and not even tolerant, but just like homophobia, what? Racism, what? Like, we're not doing that. Like, what are you guys doing? Like, I love that generation. And so, as I was thinking about this episode, I thought about what song would make the most sense for me. And when I thought about our guest today and what we're talking about, it reminded me of my girl, India Ari, who I feel like she kind of raised me, but specifically, she has this album, Songversation, which is like medicine to the soul, literally. And there's a song called I Am Light. And it's one of my favorite songs. I used to play it before I meditated because, India is just full of the meditation vibes. But in the song, India says, I am light. I am not the things my family did. I am not the voices in my head. I am not the pieces of the brokenness inside. I'm already emotional. I am light. this is how we're walking into this conversation today because some leaders show up with really big titles, others show up with bigger truths. And Lizzie Cayden is the latter. She's a prevention expert, a survivor, and one of the clearest voices that I've encountered in public health work out here in California and in leadership. So today we talk about what it means to lead while being fully human and the risk of being real. All right, I'll be right back. All right, guys. So, Lizzie Cayden is the project director of the California Community Prevention Initiative at the Center for Applied Research Solutions. Her journey through public health has spanned over a decade, from leading suicide prevention strategy at Washington State Department of Health to managing social marketing efforts for the high risk youth at the Healthcare Authority. She's a systems thinker. You know, I love a good systems thinker, a coalition builder, and an unwavering advocate for trauma informed, equity centered prevention. But Lizzie's story didn't begin with all of these accolades. She left home at 15, and we'll talk about her ACE score of 10. And she's lost loved ones like me, navigating generational trauma. And she carved out a space in a field that often fails to reflect the communities that it claims to serve. And so Lizzie's power is quiet, but it's also really strong and undeniable. It's rooted in realness. I've seen it live in action. It's rooted in empathy, honesty, and a refusal to apologize for showing up exactly as she is. So it's my pleasure to bring on my dear friend Lizzie. Lizzie, welcome to Goldenlight Academy.
Hello, Dr. James Golden. How are you?
I'm good. You look just like your photo. And, you know, people will come on, they'll give me a photo from like 25 years ago. Like, this is me. This
It's
is
just like the flavor of the season with the hair color is what is usually what's happening.
So, you know, it's interesting. I've been trying to talk to you for probably like 6 or 7 months at this point. And I've been really excited to get you on our show because I try to spotlight leaders who are doing their thing in our field of healthcare. And you've been around, you've been mentoring and opening spaces for people and including voices that you never see or that are hard to book because there's a lot of red tape usually. But can you tell our audience, like, what is prevention? You know, there's people who are coming from different disciplines as leaders, but, you know, not all of them understand our world. So, how would you describe
Oh
it?
gosh, that's such a good question too, and thank you because I am well over a decade into the field now, actually pushing 15 years, and I'm not even quite sure how I describe it in a way that makes sense. A lot of people always say, "Oh, it's you basically teach dare," which is what our generation goes back to from school, and I'm like, well. Kind of. Actually, that's not like completely off, but we also know that dare um, had some consequences that we did not necessarily intend for it to have back in the 80s and 90s when it was being implemented. So, prevention really looks at what are we doing. It's the classic what are we doing to catch people when they're still upstream before they're developing something that we would be able to diagnose or consider a really like problematic pattern of behavior that's going to be hard to interrupt and intervene upon. And some prevention can get into that gray area, right, where we're really catching people and giving them that level of support they need before they're crossing into treatment territory. But what people don't really realize about prevention often today is that it's a well-established field. It's not new. It's been around for decades. It's got its own science. It's got its own background to it. There are prevention science PhD programs throughout the country. And so people really do go on and do an entire field of education in this dissertation level work. And there's even entire research labs that have been established for prevention science. And so I usually support substance use prevention. That's kind of where I came up into the field through. And I feel like no matter where my positions wax and wane throughout my career, I tend to end up back there. But I've done suicide prevention. I've worked specifically with tribal populations. I've done health promotion. And you can even talk about things like violence prevention or obesity prevention and chronic disease prevention. And so what's cool about the science is it tends to map on if you're really intentional about making sure you're mapping onto the risk and protective factors that people experience. And that requires you to get to that human level.
Yeah, I think one of the things about prevention that I love and I teach my students is that we spend a lot of time talking about how to treat people in America. We spend a lot of time talking about, well, this is what you do post crisis, or what we do once we have diabetes, or, like once you've had a suicide attempt. But to me, the heart of the work that we need to help push our humans forward is really in showing them, here is what exists, and let us help to prevent you walking through some of these spaces. And did you feel called to this work, or do you feel that this was something that you really sought out, where it was like, okay, I definitely want this track as a prevention leader?
I tried to avoid it, actually, if I'm being completely honest. When I was in graduate school, I gave myself 2 hours a week to play in a community orchestra, and I had made a friend, right, an acquaintance, who I sat next to.
Oh, wait, hold on. What
I was cello.
instrument did you
I
play?
was second chair because I didn't want to have to do all the bowing. So I also actively, I was avoiding any responsibility. So, but I enjoyed playing. I was a cello, and I also used to play upright bass, but that's a lot to get around, especially with my physical body.
I remember dragging that around. And we had, when I was in middle school, we had the up that you had to like actually carry. There was no rolling at that time. It was like
Yep.
old school cloth.
Yeah.
So I knew we were connecting on other things.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I love that.
Upright bass
Shout
in
out to
high school
Dan.
for like pit orchestras, but there were times where I needed a step stool to get all the way up there. Because when you're playing for 3 hours, like you can't maintain that posture that long and reach, because I, 5'4". So this particular, it was just my self-care space. And even in grad school, even when I had not yet entered into my journey of recovery, it was like one place I gave myself every week. And the first chair Viola, I knew that she had a fellowship or was in a fellowship, and she knew I was doing an internship. And my graduate work, I was really focusing heavily on epidemiology and diet, and I was actually really interested in gestational diet and the impacts on health and neurodevelopment. And so just out of luck, I had gotten a job in downtown DC. Granted, it was an unpaid internship. And I ran into her one day in the restroom of all places, like, outside of Virginia in downtown DC. And we recognized each other when we were washing our hands in the restroom. And it's like, you. And so we got to talking and comparing notes. And as we were walking back to our offices, which happened to be right next door to each other, she said to me, "Do you have any interest in substance use prevention?" And I was like, "Absolutely not. That's a hard stop. No, I want nothing to do with it." And immediately I was like, this is what I'm trying to get away from. This has been such a part of my childhood and upbringing that I want nothing to do with. I had gone through undergrad and not a drinker, like all of these things. Then she goes, "Well, it pays." I'm like, tell me more. So, because,
Right.
broke grad students. So, yeah,
Exactly.
and so I took it because honestly, selfishly, I was like, this will build my portfolio. It'll help me get a job after grad school. And I was like, what a cool feather to have in your cap as an epidemiologist, because behavioral health epi is very rarely studied as a specific area of focus. So I don't want to say I did it for selfish reasons, but I did it for self-promoting reasons. Absolutely. And once I got into it, it was the CIAMSA, Center for Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, their Center for Substance Abuse Prevention, CSAP. It was their workforce development program that at the time was a national program. And so I was in the national office with the National Association of State Alcohol and Drug Abuse Directors. And I did what was supposed to be a 2-year program. I entered late, so I had to catch up, and I had no background. But the field got me, and it kept me. And so here we are. I was in the 2012 cohort, and I'm still here.
I have some great friends at SAMHSA, and the director is just, they've been so supportive of our mission, with my work at the college, but also with some of my work. And I know how big of a deal that fellowship is and the internship. One of my assistants, who I was like, don't leave me, went to SAMHSA, and then she left, and she's doing huge things in the Bay Area now. And so, shout out to SAMHSA, that I think, they strike me as an organization that is very open, and that will say things and do things that will help the community. I've used a lot of their resources. Now, you're coming in as a young woman in public health in a time that is riddled with Me Too, that is still impeding on women's rights, is still um, having a hard time with the LGBTQ plus community, a time that is, we're just not healed. Are there any barriers? Is there any resistance to you being a young woman in this field?
Yeah, and that's such a good question. And I go back and forth personally with it too, because I'll have people tell me sometimes, what was just said to you wouldn't be said if you were a man. And I don't know if I've just gotten so used to it that I don't necessarily recognize it when it happens, or if I'm just so confident in our field because I know it inside and out now. Like, SAMHSA took a risk on me, and I didn't take that lightly. And so this is my career. This is my professional journey. And I feel so honored to have something that I can invest into, and also personally match so well with. But I do think that there are definitely barriers. And I've even been told before, when I've pushed back on stuff that I know is grounded in science. Like I said, my background's in epidemiology. I know how to do my homework and find my receipts for my data points. But I've had people say that before to me, even in a public setting, of, well, your age this, or implying because I'm a woman. I also am often guess my age is lower than it actually is. I'm almost 40. People don't always realize that either. And part of that's on purpose, because I spent so many years trying to connect with youth. And so I feel like to connect with youth, you have to be able to meet them where they are instead of expect them to have adult level conversations. Um,
Is
you
this why we
know,
look like this? I just thought
and
about
some
that.
really expensive face cream and lack of sunlight in the Pacific Northwest, potentially. But yeah, it can be hard sometimes, because I would be lying if I said I don't get my feelings hurt, because I've really worked hard to get where I am. But also, I recognize that that can cause harm just by saying that, right? In a professional level setting and meeting space, nobody wants to get into trying to one up each other of who deserves to be here more, because in prevention, it's so critical that, not even critical, like necessary, to make sure that the voices who don't have an education or academic background in prevention, or professional background in prevention, have their voices elevated more than mine. Like, my job is to make sure that the voices that are in the communities that we're supporting are first and foremost. And so when those little microaggressions around age, or my being a woman, a cis woman, happen in professional settings, I try really hard to not react to that. If it's really inappropriate, sometimes I'll share the impact that a statement had after the fact. And I will say that that's, as I've been willing to lean into that, that's been met often with a lot of resolution and accountability, which has been nice to see. So I'm working just on myself and saying, hey, I don't know if you meant to have that impact, but this is how it landed on me. And the more I think about it, the more I think that that often probably happens to our students who are serving in our services. And so if we want to have student voices, if we want to have youth voices, if we want to have young adult voices present in our work, and we invite them into the space and we give them a seat at the table, we also have to be willing to actively listen to them and build on what they're saying, and take that as serious as any other voice at the table, if not more so. So it's kind of become like an underlying superpower in a way, because it helps me really empathize with other, especially young females, that I see it happening to.
Wow, I think one of the things that I love about what you said is it's one thing for us to talk the talk. Like the Migos have a song called "Oh Walk It Like I Talk It," and so, but it's another thing for us to actually walk what we're
Hmm.
saying. And so when you are telling young women, young teens, this is how you show up, this is how you advocate for yourself, and then you turn around and you do that, and you do it in your own way. I think that there's a lot of power in that. And that's not something that people will not see. I think that's something that I think people will respect in your leadership, and really in anybody's leadership. I wonder for you, because one of the things that I think happens a lot for me, interestingly enough, I mean, I get like racial microaggressions at work, and not all the times, people don't know that it's a microaggressions, but then there's a lot of gaslighting, it
Hmm.
seems like, in the industry, and this like identity based harm. And I'm wondering for you, how do you sort of balance showing up as yourself, with the expectations around professionalism, because we're at such a important role,
Yeah.
in our
Yeah.
field.
And that's another really good question because for me, I think it comes from multiple places. Um, I see the harm because of the trust that my organization has been able to build. And my project's one project at the Center for Applied Research Solutions, but we've got a huge portfolio across the organization of all sorts of behavioral health and school-based and suicide prevention, just all these amazing projects. And the one thing I will say that's the common thread is that we show up authentically. And that means sometimes we need to have those harder conversations. And so I couldn't do it if I didn't have that community and that system level of support professionally, because my personality has gotten me into lots of pickles in other positions. And, at the time it was hard.
And
And now I'm like, well, the universe had a higher plan for me. And I just needed to hang out until I could figure out what that was and fall into that pattern. Um, but for me, where I really make sure that I won't drop my voice is I want to make sure that the generations coming up behind me have the ability to have these conversations. And like you said, Gen Alpha, I agree. They are ready to go. I don't want them to know a world of racism, of homophobia, of transphobia, of bigotry, of xenophobia, of all of these things that we see as just like such an easy way to throw a curveball in a conversation and expect that okay, the conversation's over now because I've said something super inappropriate and now everybody's uncomfortable. I try to get curious and be like, whoa, I don't know if you realize how that just landed, but it sounds like you think this. Can you clarify? And I've received the feedback
it's a
that's
phenomenal.
inappropriate to say. Well, maybe it was inappropriate to say the first thing in the first place. And we've gotten into this dynamic in
Yeah,
professional behavior that we don't lean into conflict. We don't have hard conversations. We don't work through dialogue. And that's really disappointing because if we're willing to do that and assume best intent and address harm, we can actually be stronger on the other side. And that's true of all fields. So there's that. And then there's just also protecting the voices of the younger professionals who are coming behind me. Um, Gen Z is another generation that is just really, really doing the work right now. And if they're going to do the
yeah,
work, we need to be able, I'm an older millennial, we need to be able to set the stage so that they can do that, right? Not take
me
the
too.
space, not take the voice, not take the spotlight. It's not about my voice. It's about me setting them up so that they can take the space and have the success that they need to experience.
Ooh, I love that. I love that. So setting up the space. And so this is interesting. I'm also an older millennial. Shout out to the 90s kids. And one of the things that I realized, and it kind of I talked about this in my clip, but when I was teaching sixth grade English, and I just had one of my students who's now going to USC, and they reached out to me and was like, "Thank you so much." And I was like bawling in the car coming down to San Diego. Um, because I was like, you did way more for me because you were way better. I remember in the classroom, there was a day I was so worried because one of my kids was outed at school. And so then here comes all my triggers and all of my growing up. And I'm like, oh, okay, 90s kids, we had a really hard time with um, anything L, the G, the B, the
Mhm.
T, any of it. And I was so worried that she was going to experience, a lot of bullying in the class. When I tell you, I came back from lunch and that entire classroom of sixth graders was like, oh, this is our best friend. Like, we love her. Like, I mean, it
Amazing.
was the heart. I just got chills, like the heart that they had. I was like, well, what happened in our
Yeah.
generations? I was just blown away by how much compassion there was. So I resonate with your idea that we need to allow these generations to not be jaded by the same ridiculousness that our generations have had to endure. And I also recognize that we had it a little bit easier in some ways than the people who came before us, my older brother, my parents. I mean, it was a very
Mhm.
different discussion. We didn't have any gay straight alliances when I was in high school, but uh, you know, it
Yeah,
just wasn't the way that it was when my dad was in school in the
absolutely.
50s.
Absolutely. And there's just even that level of it too for any layer of leadership. And maybe we're lucky in a sense in the prevention field because it's such a small field that mentoring doesn't really happen just based on number of years in the field or how many communities you've served. Mentoring really happens at a peer level where you're co-mentoring each other. And so one of my greatest mentors is in his 70s and an LGBT man, right? But when I was talking to him one day and called him just to ask his thoughts on something, he tells me, well, really, you're one of my biggest mentors. And that was a really pivotal moment for me too in our current programming work in the field is we need to be willing to learn from each other. We have so many things that we can do if we put our shared voices together and we work in collaboration with each other and we lean into that curiosity and asking why, learning from each other's experiences, not to compare them, but just to see how much of a common thread we have between all of us. The other thing is your story's so good because research always shows in prevention that one adult, just one person, and it doesn't matter who it is, can really be that turning point for a young individual who's otherwise experiencing a lot of adversity, whether that's because of trauma or a non-dominant community identity or intersectionality or bullying. Any of these things, right, can really make the difference between whether or not a young person grows up and engages in substance use or develops mental health challenges or doesn't. Uh, and so I just was recently talking to my sixth grade math teacher, and that was a long time ago, a really long time ago. But she was one of those people for me, and I will never forget that. I'll never forget the impact she had on me, and kind of course correcting my younger life before I even realized that I was potentially in trouble.
Okay, I don't know. You must be trying to get me to cry today because I don't know how I just got this emotional all of a sudden, but it's all of this the equity and everything that I've been talking about this week. And having the student reach out, I don't think that's an accident. Right before I
Yeah.
speak about to administrators about the power of the systems that we implement, and to hear you say that one person really can make a difference, I just got chills throughout my whole body, and it makes me really believe that teachers are some of our greatest leaders. Prevention staff, the ones that don't have the titles, that are out, with the condoms
Mhm.
and that are out tabling in the hot sun in Los Angeles, that those are community leaders. Those are people who are they're the servants of the community. And I think we don't always get the thank yous. We don't always get the immediacy of you graduated. Sometimes it comes years later when you see somebody that you outreach to, or when you see a community make a huge change, and you say, I was a part of
Yeah.
that. That's so cool. So I love hearing that. Now, you alluded to like lived experience a little bit. And one of the things that we talked about prior to taping is you said that lived experience shouldn't be a contest, which I absolutely adore and love. And what's the danger when we start to have like the pain Olympics or the um, performative Hunger Games of lived experience? What are your thoughts
Gosh,
on that?
I think there's just a few things with that. There's the personal piece that comes to mind for me first, that has been a learning curve and will probably be a learning curve for a long time for me, of just having to have that personal responsibility and taking care of yourself. I grew up in a home with five siblings, but all five of us would probably tell very different, not different stories of what we experienced, but different impacts of how it played out in our life after, well, during and after those years. And so I think comparing experiences can get into a really dangerous game of, instead of looking at what happened, we're looking at kind of, I don't want to say trying to one up each other, because that feels like an inappropriate way to express it, but it kind of is a deflection from what we're actually talking about. Um, and I also just
Yeah.
think that there's this personal accountability, which I hated. I will say, when I was at my most unhealthy point and somebody said to me in a professional setting, like, it's not your fault what happened, but it is your responsibility to take care of it. That stung, right? Because you're already so down. And it's true, right? It's true and it's valid. I would love to.
And it's hard to say and it's
Yeah,
hard to
because
hear.
it's like, it almost feels like victim shaming. And I would never identify as a victim, but it's like, okay, I'm already down and now you're telling me it's my job to dig myself out of this hole. Right. And what really helped me was people who could empathize with my experiences and get down in the hole with me, and like, all right, we're going to climb out together, but we're not going to climb out by talking about and focusing only on what happened. We're going to look at where your strengths are. We're going to look at where your motives are. We're going to look at what drives you, what makes you happy, what makes you tick, what makes you feel connected. For me, that was education, which we know is a protective factor in our field, and really was just a huge stroke of luck for me personally, that I was so invested in my education, because it gave me those connections to those strong adults who could be role models and mentors, who I still talk to this day. Um, but also, it gave me something to look forward to, instead of always looking back on what happened and comparing notes of what went wrong. It gave me connections into people who I wanted to be more like, who I wanted to model my behaviors after, who I saw doing well, who I saw also had overcome adversity or challenges or trauma or whatever it might be for them. And I knew nuggets of their information. I knew pieces of their stories, but we didn't focus on that. We focused on, how do I turn that into something that I can offer forward, that I can overcome, that I can layer into how I show up day to day in my life. And it was similar for me in academia. I really thought about going on and doing a PhD and becoming a professor. But then, as I was going through that process and talking to the professors who I respected the most, they had all gone out in the world and kind of messed things up and then come back to academia. They had all gone out in the world and shaken their fields up and had those hard conversations and lived through all of those experiences. And so I realized, well, if I really want to follow in their footpaths, if I really want to take what I've lived through and apply it to doing something better for someone else so that they don't have to experience that, I got to get out in the world, and I got to be willing to have hard conversations. And lived experience and living experience can be a part of that conversation, but it's not the center focal point. And that's where I see a lot of deflection start happening, right? To your question, that's where I see, if we just spin out on, and we can do it at a population level too, like, this population is disproportionately affected by this, but this population's worse. That can be really important decision
Okay.
making on where we spend our funding and why. But really, what we should be talking about is, how are we going to reach both populations in a way that's appropriate and meaningful for them each, versus comparing them and putting them
Wow.
against each other.
I love that because I do a lot of population specific talks. And, I've found naturally when I first started out, I'm a Black Studies major. I've been a Black man for 40 years. So, when it comes to understanding, I think some of the big needs in the Black community, that's where my background is. And so I came from college ready to say, we need to, I'm about to be on my Malcolm X, which I still low key am in a way. But what I started to realize the more that I engaged with other communities is that, yeah, so it might not have been slavery, but there was another thing that was detrimental and changed the fabric of that community. And so when I would share my story, what I found the similarities in were our reactions, our respect for our ancestors, our desire for true justice. And some of the pieces, and I said, I see you. And the indigenous community really was one of those big pieces for me where I felt like, well, we're the same. Like we're us. It's us. It's not us and y'all. It's very much like justice means justice for all,
Yeah.
and not just for this group. And and then there's the caste system, and there's for me it's like, well, out of all of the, I have technically have a disability and different. I'm like, how do I choose which one I'm
Yeah.
going to focus on? Is it going to be the race? Is it going to be the sexuality? Is it going to be the issues for people who are different, um or is it I'm just going to
Yeah.
live my life in as a
Yeah.
justice warrior? And so in whatever space I'm in, I'm pulling out information about what's happening to immigrants. I'm pulling out information about what's happening to women. I'm talking about trans women. I'm talking about all different groups, people with disabilities, because I have this strong desire for justice in our world, and for us to be able to live in a place where everybody feels safe, seen, valued, and heard.
100%.
And then people are like, well, why and
Exactly.
how?
Yeah,
How did you
exactly.
get
And that's the perfect approach, because instead of getting into this back and forth of talking about how bad things are, most of us know, right? And when it comes to especially equity and justice centered work, if you have a non-dominant identity, most of us have experienced the challenges multiple times in our lives. We know. And I think there's always room for empathy and honoring people's truths, but I'm never going to question somebody else's truth. That's their truth and I'm going to honor it. But the why and the how, right? So how are we going to move forward, and how are we going to move forward so that we're not placed against each other? Because in engaging in that dynamic of who has it worse, or what community is being disproportionately impacted today, those things are always going to be happening. And it's not to displace it or say and not acknowledge it, right? Because I feel like that's critical. We have to acknowledge the harm. And also, how do we stand together and not become part of the systemic harm ourselves, right? How do we stand together and be like, great, here we are. How do we lean into allyship? Because allyship isn't just showing up for Pride Month, right? And supporting people. Allyship isn't just saying it's Black History
right?
Month and let me put up the thing in my garden. Allyship is when you see a microaggression happen, you call it out appropriately, and you don't speak on behalf of the community that you're in allyship with, but you have the courage to pull someone aside privately afterwards, as a white person to another white person, and say, hey, super inappropriate. I don't know if you knew, but I just wanted to share why and the impact and how that's connected to perpetual harm. It can be as simple as, like, we're trying to get away from the grandfathered in. Like, do we know the history of what that means and why? And let's try to get away from that phrase, right? Most people don't know. But little things, right? And instead of getting defensive, being, oh my gosh, I didn't know. Thank you so much for telling me, right? Or if you misgender someone, and I had an employee recently correct me and was like, hey, you just misgendered them. And I was just tired, right? Sleep deprived, got a baby, totally on me still, right? And she let me know. I was like, thank you for reminding me, like, complete accident, but I appreciate you catching it and letting me know that I did it, because I hadn't even realized I did it. I was that tired. And so there's always areas for opportunity and growth. And the minute I see a leader think that they've, like, accomplished that as a checkbox, I get worried, right? Because I'm like, you're not untouchable to humanistic work just because of a
Yeah.
degree or a job title. If anything, you're more accountable to leaning into that and leading by example.
And that's you bring up a really good point because I think what happens for a lot of leaders is we get really critical about people confronting us about these things related to being human. And I can admit that for me, it was kind of hard in the beginning because I was like, no, you don't confront your leader. But I started to realize I would have people who were entry level staff who would say, hey, this was a little insensitive, or, we don't. I remember when I've studied healthcare, and so we learned the term
Mhm.
Latinx. And this was a huge moment for me. And this was just a few years ago. I mean, I've been writing about this, and my boss is this huge public health scholar who went to Berkeley. And so he's like, yeah, this is what we use. And da, 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 da. But I got with the community, and they were like, we don't want that word. We don't want it. And these are all of the reasons why. And I had my assistant and some of my health educators on, and they were like, oh my gosh, she just went off on you. And I said, I'm glad she went off on me because it shows me the importance of not putting my labels or things that
Yeah.
I've learned on a community, but listening to that community. And I said, if we did more of that, we would be able to reduce some of these issues that people have, because she could have not said that to me. I could have continued to use that word and it would have pissed her off every time we talked.
100%. And also, it's kind of an honor that she felt safe enough to go off on you, right? Like there's a layer of trust there where she
Yeah.
not only felt safe to be heard, but she felt safe to be respected and being like, this is a point of frustration and it's not about you. It's a point of something was really upsetting her and she was able to communicate that. And I think I am trying to get away from labeling that as unprofessional or insubordinate or inappropriate, right? We can't have it both ways where we want to pull in lived and living experience. We want to honor
Yep.
the harm that systems have caused people or personal experience have caused people, but then be like, but you have to fit this mold in 9 to 5, how you show up in your day-to-day work. It's just, you can't have it both ways because then we're perpetuating the exact systemic harm that we're trying to get away from.
It's the realness for me. Like that's the whole title of this episode. It's like the value of being real. And a lot of times we say, keep it real, keep it real. But do we really want people to keep it real? Like, I really do. It comes with a lot of pain. You're talking about people's grandparents, their ancestors, their bloodline. This is not things that are pretty to say all the time. Like sometimes it's gonna come with some energy and some, like I want you to feel it. I want you to understand what I'm talking about. And I love that about people who are strong in their
Yeah.
convictions about who they are, what their identity is, and how they're going to be treated. We need more of this, Lizzie.
Thank you. And it means a lot. For me, it's such an underfunded field in prevention. Behavioral health is underfunded. Clinicians, if you put a clinician next to a medical provider, I mean, they're paid pennies. And then prevention, we're like portions of a penny. And so, right. So the field is underfunded. It is not very diverse. It's not representative of the people that we're serving. And for me, it's two things. It's like I've got to be able to put my head on the pillow at night and know that I'm doing my part to leave the world better for my niece and nephews and son. And also, there's not very many seats, right? So if I'm not willing to do the hard work and roll up my sleeves, then I need to step down and get out of the way for somebody who is. And I feel like that's especially important that I live in a white body, right? And so like that inherently comes with privilege. That inherently comes with things that I'm going to be able to navigate in a way without as many barriers as some of my peers in the field. And so again, it's not about taking up the space or taking up the voice, but it's about making sure that I'm doing my work to make sure that the voices I'm bringing forward in the state of California, where I support right now, does look like the communities that are being served. And then I stand in the back room and I shut up, right? There's always time for my voice. I do have subject matter expertise to offer. I do have lived and living experience. I am queer. I am a solo mother. I do have my own identities, but that's not what it's about. That's not why I show up each day. I show up each day to make sure that we are actually leaning into our values and we're holding our system accountable. And I'm just really fortunate that in my current role, both on my project that I support as well as at my organization, we live by those values. We don't just put them in writing and be like, this is what we're going to do. But we have some hard conversations. And then I walk away. I'm like, oh, I'm going to take a walk for a minute because that was a lot. And then I shake it off and come back because that's where the hard work is happening.
You can see it, it's palpable. I've seen you with your team, and you're not an example of someone who just speaks those words. It's tangible. You can feel it. You can feel it like it's in your veins. And I've been in spaces that have been performance, and I'm like, okay, that's interesting. I see what we did there with that poster on the wall, but you guys are really actually doing that work. One of the things that you just talked about that really hit me in my heart was, when we have been blessed with these leadership roles, we have a responsibility to make space at the table. And not just for people who look like us, but for other underrepresented groups. And as you were talking about white privilege, I thought about male privilege for me, which I'm constantly thinking about because I am othered in many ways. And so it will be very easy for me to say, oh, okay, well, I don't have these privileges. No, I have the privilege of having a doctorate degree and having gone to Harvard and being a man in this country. And I think, when I think about opening the college, for me, it was like, I need to see, what do we need to see in education? We need more women. We need more women of color who are leaders. We need more trans women who are at the forefront. We need more women with hijabs on. And, I was really interested. I made that one of my missions as a leader, to front load that college and to put people in places. And these are like beyond qualified women who have been waiting for opportunities to lead, and to see them come in and flourish, and to take my little curriculum and different things and make
Yeah.
it what it could have always been. They just needed an opportunity. And I think that's another beautiful thing that we have as leaders, is the ability to right some of those wrongs. And that's another place where one person in a system really can make a difference in keeping it real. Now, when we were talking, you described yourself as a recovering toxic
Right.
perfectionist. And I am obsessed with that term. And so I'm wondering, what does that mean to you? And what has letting go in general taught you about power?
Yeah. It's so funny because like the toxic perfectionist is just something I've started putting the word toxic in front of it because I just can't shake it, but we're gonna get there. Um, so when I got my first job, like the one that I was really excited about, happy to be in, outside of the fellowship program in prevention, I went down the row. We were in cubicles one day to show the person that I would have considered, no, here comes the cat, my senior, right? The person that I wanted to get into her role. She did the data and evaluation work, and I really wanted to impress her. And I'd also inherited a whole bunch of her work and her contracts. So I was really proud of myself. And I went down and did this and this and this. And she's like, yeah, it looks good. And I don't think she was giving me the emotional feedback that I was seeking. She was happy with my work. It wasn't anything wrong with it, but she wasn't kind of doting on me. And she was probably just busy. Um, and I'm like, well, I can make it better. I'm a perfectionist, so I'm going to make sure I take care of it. And I've been there for a few months. And she goes, honestly, a piece of feedback, I really like your work, but that is one of your most unattractive qualities as a peer. And I was like, ooh, because like I put a lot of weight in that. Like it was a gold star. And like to get my gold star ripped down to like, this is your bottom level of like why I don't want to work with you, it stung. And at the time, right, I hadn't really gotten into my own journey of well-being yet. And it festered probably for a good few years until I started to go through some processes of unlearning and relearning, specifically around white supremacy values, right, and why that's harmful and some of the antidotes to address it. I still struggle with it. And I think for me personally, it just goes back to education was that protective factor for me. That was where I could get good attention. That was where I could build connections. That's where those adults who I really looked up to doted over me as a child. And it's where I sought that positive reinforcement. And sometimes B-level work actually is more it can reach more people than that A-level work where the way you're writing is no longer community aligned. You're saying the right words, but when people read it, do they feel connected into it, right? Your A-level work, your academia, this is grammatically perfect. All of the font sizes are amazing. Like, does it really matter, right? Does it really matter? And it doesn't. And then the other thing that I've just really realized is that chronic perfectionism by default is putting me into always feeling like I need to multitask. And multitasking is just a recipe for disaster, especially as someone who struggles with their attention and keeping attention on a given task at any particular time. And so trying to step away from that. I think perfectionism also is a really unintentional way to not have other voices present in your work. If you get it to good and then you ask somebody else what they think, or multiple other people preferably what they think and how you can improve your work, your final product's always going to be better than if you got it to your A plus, I did it by myself perfectionist level. So
I needed to hear that, and it's also a journey for me. And I did in that context, I see some of the same like perfectionist qualities in me, and I've been working really hard on that. You know, the greatest teacher for me is nature. And what's interesting, and this is how I know, is
braiding
um,
sweetgrass.
one of our mutual friends recommended this to me. And you know, I'm all about nature and everything. So I'm almost done with it. I'm gonna finish it today
Love
on
it.
the train. But there's no straight lines in nature. And so a lot of our behaviors when we think about trying to have that A and that perfectionism, it's like the perfection of nature is exactly in the erosion, and it's in the, you know, how things just work out on their own, and how all of these plants and animals work together to create something that no one could ever really
Yeah.
imagine, or humans don't even have the capacity to replicate. And so I think that hearing that from you kind of spoke to me. Braiding seagrass.
So good.
Braiding sweetgrass. I want you guys to check this out. And it's interesting that I have it right here and we're talking about this, but walk it like you talk it. So I have a couple of rapid fire questions before we jump off. Uh, what's one word for how you define leadership today?
Integrity and accountability, right? And they have to go together. I think if
I
you're not
love that.
willing to be uncomfortable and sit in that, it's going to, whether you realize it or not, lots of people can be leaders, but not, I don't think everybody can lead. And I think if you're not willing to sit in that uncomfortableness and walk alongside of the people that you're working with, you're losing them.
Wow. That here we go. I mean, I just think like that's such a profound answer. You know, and you know, it's like, okay, well, we would probably choose something
Yeah.
that's like honesty, integrity. But when you really think about the context of where we're at right now and what's needed in this world, in this country, in this state, um, I'm just not surprised that you chose that. Now, what do you wish public health professionals understood?
Public health professionals or people about public health? I guess.
Let's take
Yeah.
it whichever way that you feel is
So
more
here's where I'm
important
at right now
right now.
is I have made a commitment to myself that I'm not going to shut any conversation down. And people make assumptions about me all the time about you must be this or you must be that because of who I am and how I show up in the world. Um, and the reality is I'm a super complex person who I'm not even completely sure how I would make decisions about a lot of big political things right now. So if I can't figure it out about myself, I mean, people can try to guess it about me for me, but it's probably inaccurate. But it's put me in a really good position, again, leaning in with curiosity, be like, tell me why. And if I'm not willing to shut down conversations, then I also have to be willing to sit with how that might trigger me. And I'm not saying that some behaviors aren't wrong. Like there are behaviors that cause harm and are not okay. But if we're not willing to engage in restorative conversations around that and trying to share why that's harmful, we've already lost before we even started. And so there are conversations I won't continue, right? If they become unhealthy or harmful.
Yeah.
but I don't shut them down just based off of a conversation where I'm like, ooh, or a statement. It has to be something bigger where I'm like, this isn't going to be productive. And so I'm going to not engage right now. But I'm here if you want to revisit. And I think for public health, it's just that on a micro level. Especially in behavioral health, there's so much stigma. There's so much shame. There's so many assumptions made about people. We have not made a ton of room for the leadership spaces in behavioral health and public health to be embodied by people who have that lived experience. And if they do have it, they're often really afraid to share it because they're worried about being judged or stigmatized or put out of their positions or all of these things. Like I've also experienced, right? So I get it. It's a very valid fear. I have also been there. And those bad experiences, I'm just going to keep going with my story because I know that that's my purpose. And the more people come alongside, I'm like, great, there's more of us now. And it's not just me. I'm not unique. There's lots of people who show up every single day and lean into their roles through the hard pieces.
I mean, I just feel really inspired by you. And I think that, you're a good example of people who really are selfless and who are doing a lot of work to support. And I know that you don't get thank yous, but I do want you to know that we need more people like you in this industry. We need people who are willing to have these hard conversations, who are willing to come in with ethics and morals and to say things like, I will be open to having any conversation. This is the future. This is the now. This is what we need today so that your kid can have a much brighter world and state than we had. And, the generations that are coming, it's going to be a little bit better for them. And I'm just so grateful for how you lead and how you take care of our state. And your team is phenomenal, and the work that you do is just bar none. I'm a huge fan of prevention. And so, Lizzie, it's been my honor to talk to you and to share this time and my coming back and meeting with you. It's just been incredible.
Guys, thank you
On
so much. And I'm always reminded every single day. It's like I have my job to do, my role to fulfill, the stuff to send off, but it wouldn't be possible without the people who support our work, without the consultant team who comes and speaks, without the participants. I mean, they're always the most important, or the people who are actually doing the work at the community level. And I'm doing really well in my current role because I had leaders who embodied different leadership styles than the other leaders I had worked with before this role. And, they have put their faith in me and let me run with my vision. And instead of asking me why, they ask me how. And that,
wow.
that means everything to me. And so I feel very fortunate, and also am in gratitude to all of the people who make my current life structure possible for me, because it's never just one person. And I think that's what I've learned through my personal journey is it's not just about me. And the minute that it is, I've probably gone off course. So thank you.
All right, guys. So we're giving Lizzie the virtual hand clap, and definitely have to get her back on Goldenlight Academy. And so, what an incredible episode. Things that I pulled. Make sure the voices in the community come first. We have to be willing to listen to our youth who are coming behind us and not putting words in their mouth. Um, the universe having high plans for us, setting up generations to speak. Teachers and prevention staff are actually servant leaders. So I'm going to do an article on that. And then turning trauma into resilience for something. It reminds me of the lead into gold syndrome. And then leadership is integrity and accountability. And so I want to thank you guys for tuning in today. And, I think Lizzie is a great example of showing us what it means to be real in rooms that don't always know how to hold the truth. But I am better for having heard and talked to her today. I want to close with India Ari. India says, I am not the mistakes that I have made. or any of the things that cause me pain. I am not the pieces of the dream I left behind. I am light. God bless you all and be light, and I'll see you guys soon.